Today I'd like to tell you a little bit about a favorite saint of mine, St. Charles Borromeo. He lived in a very difficult day and age. It was during the Renaissance. He was born in 1538 and died in 1584, so his life wasn't all that lengthy, but it was a good life, and given the day and age, it could have been a life that turned out very differently. But he was a rather special man. Now, I don't know how much you know about the Renaissance, but it was not just a time of great learning and great art, it was also a time of terrible corruption. And that corruption, of course, affected the church. The church experienced its own bouts with all sorts of different types of corruption in that day and age. And so, St. Charles had to deal with all of that. Now, he was born in very nice circumstances. His father was a count, and his mother was a relation of the Medici family. And the Medicis were, well, this great and powerful family who were at the center of Italian politics. And so they had great princes, they had popes who weren't always so great, and they had a great deal of influence in every sphere, and they were known to be terribly corrupt themselves. But anyway, Charles grew up in a very religious household, and when he was 12, he committed himself to being a priest someday. And that may have taken place or may not have. It was a decision that would be made down the road, but he had made the commitment. And so, as life went on, his uncle became Pope, I think Pope Pius IV. And what did he do with his nephew, who was at that point 22 years old and was considering the priesthood? He brought him to Rome and made him an assistant. And he didn't just make him an assistant, but he made him a cardinal. So Charles was a cardinal before he was ever a priest. And it was supposed to be, for him, a very nice life. When your uncle is the Pope, especially in those days, you have all sorts of advantages, all sorts of perks. And that was the sort of life he was going to lead. He was made administrator of the Archdiocese of Milan up in northern Italy, which is a great city, again, before he was ever ordained. And the idea was, as would be normal in that day and age, that he would be sort of an absentee landlord. There would be people like the Vicar General or the Chancellor who would run the diocese for him, and he would sit on his estate and collect the rents and hunt and do whatever rich people did in those days. But basically, he had an income that was guaranteed for life, and he could have just taken it easy. But that's where he was different. He decided that God had put him in this position for a reason, and so he was going to make the most of it. He was going to be a bishop, and not a bishop who lived on an estate somewhere, but he was going to be a bishop who actually was a shepherd for his people. And so that's exactly what he did. He was ordained 3 years later, and then he became the Archbishop of Milan soon after that, and he did his best. He helped his uncle to push through the third session of the Council of Trent because the church needed reformation. The church needed to be fixed. Corruption needed to be stamped out. The sort of things that led him to the place he was, he knew could not persist. And so he did what he could to change all that. He was the first person to decide that there should be seminaries that would train priests so that they could be well educated, so that they could be given a common vision and a common purpose. He did all of that. He tried to stamp out corruption in his diocese, and he was very largely successful, so much so that there was even an attempt on his life by a monk who tried to kill him. It was that sort of life for Charles Borromeo. When the time of famine came, he spent everything he had feeding tens of thousands of people each and every day. And when he ran out of money, he accumulated debt after debt after debt until the famine passed, and it took him the rest of his life to pay the money back. But he did so. He did all these sorts of things because he wanted to be that good shepherd. He wanted to be the one who said, hey, God put me in this position for a reason. I have to make the most of it for him and for his holy people. And that's the life he lived. So when I think about Charles, I think of quite a few lessons. First of all, God has put each and every one of us, wherever we are, for a reason. He has a purpose for us. He has a plan. He has hopes and dreams. Our goal in life should be to ask the question, God, why am I here? God, what do you want from me? God, what do you hope for from me? God, what's the plan you have for me? And then we do our best to discern that plan and do what we can to carry it out. Charles did that well. Secondly, we can all look around us at the world and see all sorts of problems. He looked at the world around him and saw corruption. Well, it's not enough to recognize the problem. The next question should be, what do I do about it? And he came up with some ideas. When he was in a position of power and authority, he did his best to clean things up. He made sure he set the good example. He made sure that policies were changed, and he helped to not just reform the church, I think he helped to save the church. We need to make sure that as we look around and see the problems of the world, or the problems in our families, or the problems in our church, the problems in our schools, we ask, what can I do to make things better? I think that is the great lesson from Charles's life. But finally, what I love about Charles Borromeo and saints like him, there are so many who could have just chosen the easy path. He could have gone to that estate. He could have just lived as a wealthy person did in those days, and nobody would have blamed him. But he had a higher ideal in mind. He knew that he was somebody who was supposed to carry out God's will. He was somebody who's supposed to serve, so he did what he could to bear the burdens for the rest of humanity. And he didn't have an easy life, and he didn't have a long life, but he had a very fruitful life. What we need to do is make sure that we don't take the easy way out, but instead we look around and say, you know what? Somebody needs to bear the burden. Somebody needs to do the good that needs to be done. Why not me? And that would be a great way to live our lives. And so, when you think of St. Charles Borromeo, think of the great man who did all those things, the man who could have taken the easy way out, the man who could have just let the corruption of the world he lived in feather his nest, but no, he didn't. He did what was right, he did what was best, he served God, he served his holy people, and he helped save the church.